Guys, my life was always simple. I'm one of those guys who works with their hands. My wife, how do I put this? Well, the woman of my dreams. Or at least that's what I thought. She always wanted to live large, clothes, restaurants, vacations. And me? I loved her. Thought I was doing all of this for her. Worked day and night, juggling 3 jobs like a madman. I wanted her to feel like a queen. You know how it is, you naively believe you can move mountains for love. But let me tell you something, the more you try, the bigger their appetite gets. And so, at some point, she started talking more and more about the good life. And me? I had simple needs: come home, eat well, watch some football, and, well, the usual. But no, that wasn't enough for her anymore. She wanted a villa, like the one she saw on Instagram. Look, she would say, Masha from next door drives a convertible. What about me? And me, the fool, thought, don't worry, I'll earn it, we'll have everything. I didn't realize at the time that behind her smile, well, you guessed it, betrayal was lurking. At first, she started avoiding me, and then she spent more and more time with friends. Well, back then I didn't suspect a thing. I believed her, like a child. You know how it goes, you come home, and she's not there. The kitchen's empty, and you think, she's probably with a friend. Maybe she went out to the salon. Who's gonna check? You're living on autopilot. You work from dawn to dusk, and at home, there's no one to talk to. But one day I decided something had to change. I came home early, thought I'd surprise her. Maybe it was true, maybe work had consumed me, maybe she wasn't getting enough attention. I bought wine, got flowers, the classic move. I get home, silence. I think, strange, she should be here. Well, maybe she ran out to the store. I sat down on the couch, turned on the TV, and relaxed. 20 minutes go by, half an hour, silence. Well, I thought, I'll wait a bit more. I've got the wine, I'll be fine. But then a notification pops up on my phone, and that's when it all started. I opened Instagram, and there it was. My dear wife, brace yourself, with some guy, and definitely not someone from our league. This wasn't some Joe from the neighboring garage, this was a slick, business-looking guy or something like that. They're standing there all happy, and she's clinging to him like they've been together forever. And the caption reads something like, finally, I'm where I always wanted to be. Well, I thought, perfect. At that moment, my head was spinning. You know how it is, you work, you give it your all, and in return, you get this kind of gratitude. At first, I just sat there staring at the photo, like it was a paradox, I couldn't believe it was real. But then it hit me. Seriously? She'd been lying to my face this whole time? I thought, I need to figure this out without freaking out. And you know what I did? Exactly. I decided not to act rashly. I called her, like nothing happened. I asked, honey, where are you? Should I come pick you up? I've got dinner ready. And she tells me, oh, darling, I'm at a friend's house, don't worry, I'll be home late. Well, I thought, right, with a friend. If that business-looking guy is a friend, then I must have totally misunderstood life. Inside, I was boiling, but I didn't show it. I told her, okay, sweetheart, take your time. Enjoy your evening with your friend. And I hung up. But inside, I was already planning. Oh, how furious I was. I had to do something. And not just anything, I had to show her that I wasn't some pushover who turns a blind eye. So, what's my point? I decided to act smart. You see, revenge is an art, you've got to use your head. I didn't want to make her look like a fool right away. Why bother? It had to be done beautifully, so she'd be ashamed for the rest of her life. The first thing I did was start gathering information. Catching her red-handed would have been easy, but I decided to take it slow. Let her think everything was as it used to be. Let her relax. And I had already figured out how to catch her in a way that would leave no room for excuses. I started paying attention to the small things, her phone calls, her texts, her trips to the beauty salon. You know how women do it, clever, always using friends as a cover. But her mistakes began right away. One time, she said she was out with a friend, but that friend, unknowingly, posted an Instagram story, sitting at home, petting her cat. That's when I realized something was off. And what do you think happened next? One day, I got a text from that guy. Can you imagine? He accidentally sent it to me, obviously meaning to send it to her. Something like, "I can't wait to see you again. Yours." And then he signed with a name I can't even pronounce. It was that disgusting. I almost dropped my phone from laughing so hard. Can you believe how confident they were that I was a complete fool? That was the moment I decided to act. My strategy was simple: get close to this guy. Get into his circle, understand how he lived, and strike where he'd least expect it. I knew that sooner or later, they'd both regret getting involved with me. I started nudging him toward deals that were doomed from the start. You know, those projects where you have to invest a lot of money, and the return comes much later. And that was the trick. He couldn't resist the temptation of making big money fast. I hinted at him, "Look, I've got this business opportunity, but it's risky." And what do you think? He jumped at it every time like a starving man at a free meal. That was step one. Step two was slowly breaking their trust. This is where I began driving the wedge. Through mutual acquaintances, through his friends, whom I easily got on my side. I spread rumors that my ex was already looking for a new sponsor, and that this guy was just a temporary wallet. Oh, how furious he got, even though he didn't show it. But I could see it gnawing at him from the inside. And you know what? People ruin their lives on their own, with just a little push in the right direction. While she was still blissfully unaware, he was already on the verge of a meltdown. All I had to do was wait for the explosion. She thought she had everything under control, but in reality, she was already caught in my trap. And then the day came when everything was supposed to go according to plan. I sat there like a spectator in the front row, waiting for the show to begin. By this time, all the threads I had been pulling were already tied into a tight knot. She thought she was in control, that she had found a better option, and he already suspected something was wrong. I wasn't rushing things, but I didn't have to wait long either. One day, this guy, let's call him Daniel, started confiding in me. Can you imagine? This slick businessman, who supposedly had everything under control, told me that he felt his girlfriend wasn't being entirely honest with him. I almost laughed right in his face. Well, I thought, you're toast. But I kept my composure. You know, I said, maybe you're just imagining things. Sometimes women can seem distant when they've got something on their mind. And I watched as his eyes started darting around nervously. He didn't know who to trust anymore. I decided to speed things up. I suggested we meet up casually to talk business. We agreed to meet at one of the restaurants he often went to with her. You know, like friends. So we sat there, talking business, but he was sinking deeper into his thoughts, and I could see him digging his own grave. At some point, he couldn't hold it in anymore and started talking about what was bothering him. Hey, he started, don't you think my girlfriend has been acting a bit strange lately? Of course, I had noticed, long before he had. But instead of taking him down right away, I played the role of a good friend. You know, I didn't want to mention it, but since you brought it up, yeah, something's been off. Maybe you should talk to her. He went silent, and I could see him imagining the worst scenarios in his head. And that's when I dropped the bombshell. Look, Daniel, I don't want to get involved in your relationship, but if you want, I can help you find out the truth. I've got some connections that could check on her, just to be sure. He grabbed my offer right away. He was clearly on edge. I suggested setting up a little surveillance to make sure she was faithful. And you know what the best part was? I already knew she'd be in that very same restaurant that day, with him. The plan was simple: set things up so they'd run into each other, but under circumstances that would tear their perfect romance apart right in front of their eyes. The big day arrived. I made sure Daniel showed up early. He was nervous, but ready to face the truth. And she, as usual, arrived fashionably late, all dressed up, satisfied with herself, thinking she was about to enjoy another lovely evening with her rich lover. And that's when things got really interesting. The moment they saw each other, I sat in the corner, watching their faces. Their eyes looked like trapped animals. Daniel was the first to lose it and approached her. "So," he said, "these are the friends you spend all your time with?" At first, she was completely confused, then she started stammering about a misunderstanding, about how it was all a coincidence. But he was already boiling with rage. I could see her confidence crumbling as she realized her game had been exposed. And you know what was the funniest part? She still didn't realize that I had orchestrated everything. She thought she had just been caught by accident, that it was bad luck. And right when they started arguing loudly in front of the whole restaurant, I knew my mission was accomplished. The revenge had been perfect, clean, quiet, and without too much drama. But this still wasn't the end. When I walked out of that restaurant, where the family scene had just played out, I knew both of them were tangled up in their own lies. But for me, that wasn't enough. I knew leaving it like this wasn't my style. Plus, they still didn't know I was the one pulling the strings behind their drama. And you know what? I wanted to see their faces when they realized it had been me all along. A few days later, Daniel disappeared from the picture, just as I predicted. It seemed he took my advice, vanished, gone without a trace. But with her, my ex, things went a little differently. Of course, she wasn't ready to give up so easily. After that incident, a couple of weeks passed, and guess who called me? That's right. My dear ex-wife, all teary-eyed and upset. She called, trying to talk to me as if nothing had happened. "I'm sorry, I made a mistake," and all that nonsense. You know, the typical story: her world falls apart, and suddenly the good old husband becomes her last hope. If someone had told me a year ago that she'd be calling and begging for a meeting, I probably would have laughed. But now, I was a step ahead. I decided to meet with her. Yes, you heard me right. You might think I'm stupid, but I'm not. That meeting was part of my final plan. Not to reconcile, of course not. I wanted her to realize that her game was over. We arranged to meet at a cafe, and as usual, she showed up all dolled up, hoping to play her favorite role as the victim. Only this time, I wasn't the naive husband who believed her fairy tales. "I'm so sorry," she started. "I made a mistake, but I was so confused. It felt like things between us weren't the same anymore." Yeah, the same old song. I didn't interrupt her, let her talk. But then I couldn't hold back. "Do you really think, after everything that happened, you can just come here and ask for forgiveness? Did it ever occur to you that I've known more about you this whole time than you think?" She went silent. In her eyes, I saw a flicker of fear. Maybe for the first time in this whole saga, she realized I wasn't just her ex-husband who patiently put up with all her nonsense. I decided to deliver the final blow. You know what's the funniest part? I knew everything from the beginning. From that first meeting with Daniel. You thought you had fooled me? No, darling. It was you who's been in my trap all along. She couldn't find the words. Her face went pale, and at that moment, I knew she finally understood how badly she had miscalculated. I continued, "You wanted a luxurious life, you were chasing money and power, but do you know what you lost? A person who would have done anything for you. And for what? For a few fleeting pleasures?" Her eyes filled with tears, but by now, it didn't matter. I stood up, looked at her one last time, and said, "Now you're free. Do what you want with that freedom, but I'm no longer part of your life." And I walked away, leaving her alone with her tears and her shattered illusions. That was the moment when I finally found peace. I didn't feel anger or resentment anymore, just satisfaction that I was no longer part of her game. And that, probably, was my greatest victory. But you know what's interesting? After all of this, I started to think, what's next? Because revenge, no matter how sweet, can't be the purpose of life. You've got to move forward, leave the past behind. And when I looked back, I realized that this whole story had taught me the most important lesson, to value myself and never let anyone use me as a tool for their own goals again. So, with that, my friend, I end my story. Always remember this, life is a game. If you don't control your own moves, others will make you a pawn in theirs. So be smart, learn from others' mistakes, and always act with a clear head. And? What do you think? Now I'm truly free.